Welcome back to the Tool Crib. Today I want to tell you what I've learned so far by using the brand new Leatherman Ratchet Driver. Now what I did is I've been testing this on various different things, on screws, on different hardware, and I set up a block on my truck using my Wilton vise, and there's four multi-tools in particular that I really wanted to try this on, using the Leatherman Rebar, the Leatherman Super Tool 300, the Leatherman Skeletool, and the Leatherman Signal. And the reason that I chose these four is because with the first two you have to use the adapter for the truss style Phillips screwdriver. With the second two, the way the frames are designed, they kind of interfere with the mechanism for the bit exchanger. So I wanted to see how inconvenient maybe it might be with these latter two. Now, here's what I learned with the rebar. The rebar was actually pretty easy to drive these in. The only thing with the rebar is because of this adapter, and we'll just set it in here. Because of this adapter, there's a lot more side-to-side movement than you're going to get with the standard bit exchanger from the other Leatherman tools. And so that is one key thing that I noticed. Now, as far as stability on the truss screwdriver itself, this adapter fits in there very, very snugly, and so there's virtually no wobble. But I did notice a little extra by using the adapter with these two tools, the first two. So that being said, each one of them drove pretty well. I noticed it was a little more difficult with the rebar. Now, as far as working it in the closed position, it worked fairly well because the outer surface of the rebar is actually very smooth, and so by working it in this formation, it worked quite nicely. The thing of it is it doesn't have quite the heft of some of the other tools, and so when I got to some of the others, I noticed that it worked a little better. Now, this one also worked very nicely in the 90-degree position. In fact, it was quite easy and fairly comfortable to operate with in that orientation as well. Now, when I got to the Super Tool 300, this improved even more because, first of all, the Super Tool 300 just has more heft to it. And so the added heft and the ability to kind of put more pressure down on this one made this driver a lot easier. It's also extended out a little bit further, which I didn't really notice that to be a problem or an advantage one way or the other. So by driving it like this, I still encountered the same extra movement that you get between the ratchet driver and the adapter. But as far as driving capability, the extra heft of the Super Tool 300 combined with the smooth surfaces made it very comfortable to work in the normal position, and it made it very comfortable to work in the 90-degree position as well. Though it is on the inside of your finger, you do get a little bit of rubbing there, but it's not bad. It worked really, really well in this. The only disadvantage to this is that I noticed a little excess movement. Did that hinder my ability to screw those screws into that wood? I would say not really. Not much. I mean, I noticed it once in a great while where it just seemed like I just wasn't getting it straight the way I wanted to drive it. But on the whole, I think it did okay. Now, when we got to the Skeletool was a little bit different because of the fact that you have to, it's just the outer frame of the Skeletool is not the most comfortable in the world. And you can't really drive it like this. Now, I started a couple screws like this just to see if I could, how comfortable it would start. And they seem to be okay. They seem to be not bad. Working it in the 90-degree position, it was decently comfortable, but because the Skeletool kind of has this curve back, the orientation was a little bit, I don't know exactly what the word I'm looking for here is, but it just felt a little weird, I guess is the way I'll put it. Now, what I will say in the Skeletool, because it has the bit exchanger, the connection here was a lot more solid. The only wobble you get is in the driver itself. As far as in the tool, it seats in there incredibly well, and that's going to be true of all the other tools that have the bit exchanger. So it was a lot more comfortable as far as stability in the Skeletool. Now, when we got to the Signal was a little different because the Signal kind of flops around. It's so loose. So I really found it more advantageous to work this with the Skeletool, or excuse me, with the Signal completely opened up. It was just easier to get that started by having it open up, and I kind of had to pinch into the pliers, but it acted more like a screwdriver in that fashion, so it wasn't bad. And then once I got that driver to a point where it was straightened out and was driving, then by moving over into the 90-degree position, I felt like it was pretty comfortable, and it's very stable in the bit exchanger as well. Now, if I had to rank them as far as which one I like using this driver in the most, I would have to put them like this. I would say the Super Tool 300 was probably the best of the group, even though it has that excess wobble in the adapter. The extra heft and the smooth surfaces of the Super Tool 300, it was much more comfortable to use in that tool. The second one is probably the Signal, and this is a combination. The Signal has a bit more heft than some of these. I just like the orientation. It was a lot stronger, the connection, because it's into the bit exchanger, and I just felt more comfortable just slightly using it. Actually, I take that back. I'd probably say if I had to, I'd actually place these two together, the Rebar and the Leatherman, because the Rebar is a little bit more comfortable, has that little bit of excess wobble, has a decent amount of heft to it, but I would probably put those two together. I mean, each one of them has a little bit of disadvantage over the other. Each one has a little bit of an advantage over the other. So they actually come in pretty close. The least favorite of mine to use this in was in the Skeletool. And that's because it was very cumbersome to use it in the closed position, because it doesn't quite close all the way. It's not quite as solid. Then the outer surfaces or the outer edges of the Skeletool are not the most comfortable in the world, and it lacks the heft of some of these other tools. And so I found myself having to put more down pressure into that screw, seemingly, with the Skeletool than with these other tools. Now, did it drive it okay? Yeah, absolutely. All of them worked, and they worked pretty well. I would probably say, obviously, the more stable are going to be any tool that has the bit exchanger are going to be a better fit for this tool, though with the adapter, you can make it work with a lot of these other tools. Now, after I got done driving these screws, 5 apiece with those other multi-tools, I decided to bring out the Leatherman Wave and the Leatherman Surge, the two most popular multi-tools in the Leatherman platform, to see how I liked it in combination with the ratchet driver. Now, I have to say that the Wave and the Surge both performed very, very well. First of all, they're using the bit exchanger, so it's very, very stable. Secondly, for the most part, they have fairly smooth outer edges. Now, I will say it was a little bit less comfortable using either one of these than the Rebar and Super Tool counterparts when you're using it in the straight position, because there's a lot more hot spots. However, when you open them up and you put them in their 90-degree position, or if you're opening them up and you're putting them out in their full open position, these two were more comfortable than both the Rebar and the Super Tool 300 respectively. So in the Wave, I would actually probably put the Wave almost on par with how comfortable and how easy it was to use with the Super Tool 300, for the fact that it's a little bit more stable. It has almost as comfortable a grip as it does in the Super Tool 300, but I would definitely probably put the Wave just either right with it or just barely behind it. Now, the best of the group was the Leatherman Surge, and that is really going to come down to a couple of different factors. First of all, it is most stable because of the bit exchanger, and among all these tools, it has the most heft. And so driving these screws in there, just the added heft of the Surge actually works to your benefit. That, combined with the fact that it is fairly comfortable to use in its closed position, but it is really comfortable to use in its 90-degree position. And because of the styling of the frame on both the Wave and the Surge, they also feel like they're a little bit stronger, if you will. Now, I didn't notice a ton of flex in any of these tools, but it's just something that you notice with the Wave and the Surge. It's just the frames are built stronger because of all the different breaks in the frame handles, and so it was most comfortable to use in my Leatherman Surge, bar none. Even though, if you watch my channel, you know that I carry the Leatherman Surge, and so that's my go-to. This is trying to be as least biased as possible. The Surge wins out over the Super Tool 300. That stability makes up the difference, even though the Super Tool 300 might be just a touch more comfortable to use in its closed position. Now the great thing about this new ratchet driver is the fact that it works among so many different Leatherman multi-tools. Any tool that has the bit exchanger, including stuff like the mutt, it is going to work in there. Now, much like with the Signal and the Skeletool, because of the styling of the mutt, you're going to have to either use it in the 90-degree position or you're going to have to use it in the fully open position. So it makes it more comfortable to use in stuff like the Wave, Rebar, Super Tool 300 Surge. The great benefit though is so anything that has a truss style screwdriver from the Leatherman lineup, this will work in as well. And so I brought out my Juice S2, which I know these are discontinued, but I know a lot of people have these. And then if you have something like a Blast or the Rebar Super Tool 300, any multi-tool out there that had this truss style screwdriver, you're going to be able to utilize this with the addition of the adapter. And so is it not quite as stable, but it's actually pretty workable. Now, I didn't try it on here on the Juice S2, but for light duty work, I would think that would work pretty good because obviously it doesn't have the heft of these other multi-tools. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is what I was trying to accomplish with this driver. A lot of times with cheaper made ratchets, what you'll find is if you are really moving them fast to tighten in a fastener, that sometimes in lesser quality ratchets, the mechanism will move over into the lock position as you're tightening it. I know if you've worked sockets and ratchets for any length of time, you've experienced this. I tried very hard to make this do just that, this ratchet adapter, and I have not been able to yet. Now, on the initial review of this, one thing that I did notice is that it can be a little tough to move it back and forth, but I've noticed that once I got accustomed to it, it's really not that difficult to get it to move back and forth into its different positions. So what I was impressed with this is the fact that so far I have not been able to throw it out of either its clockwise or counterclockwise position when I set it. So it stays set where it's supposed to. Now I think a lot of that or some of that might have something to do with the fact that because of the style of this driver and how it's being used in these different multi-tools is that you are exerting more down pressure than you would in, say, a ratchet. Ratchet, mostly it's lateral pressure. Sometimes you're putting down pressure on them, and I think that might be part of the reason why I have not been able to get this to throw out of either forward or reverse. But overall, I've been pretty impressed with this so far. I've probably driven about somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 different fasteners with it so far, and it has performed better than I expected, actually. Now we're going to really start exerting some force on this. We're going to be putting some socket adapters on it and just really trying to overwork this thing to find out what it's actually capable of. We'll be doing that here pretty shortly. Well, my name is Ben. You've been watching the Texas Tool Crib. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.